It's time to fire this thing up.
Welcome aboard ShipShape TV Essentials. This is your port of call for the most impactful upgrades, expert advice, and hands-on solutions from seasons past. This episode is proudly brought to you by SureHold, because anything worth doing is worth doing bright. From cleaning to protecting and perfecting, SureHold has everything you need to keep your boat shining. Don't just go boating, go showboating. Now, let's hoist anchor and set a course for another exciting episode of ShipShape TV Essentials.
Countersink some holes, screw it down, and I'm again going to let this last out. Dry fit this thing to the boat. Hi, I'm John Greviskis. It's good to have you working around the boat with us again. We have a problem going on with the exhaust manifold on this 1988 3.0 liter MerCruiser engine. It's leaking and we need to replace it. And while I'm at it, I'm also going to be replacing this piece of equipment right here. It's called a riser, and it's an elbow-shaped piece of equipment. Now, both of these parts are made from cast iron, and they have a tendency to corrode and rust on you, and that's why I'm using the penetrating oil on the bolts. I'm hoping that it will somehow seep down into the threads and will allow us to break them free. Otherwise, we're going to have to get creative. So here's the deal. We need to get you to spend the next 30 minutes with us. And in exchange, right after I gather up a few tools for this first repair, we're going to be letting you in on a few more ways to keep your boat shipshape.
This is a real working 28-acre boatyard located in Stuart, Florida, on the shores of the Okeechobee Waterway. It's home base for ShipShape TV. This deep stretch of water connects the Atlantic Ocean to the Gulf of Mexico. And now, once again, here's the host of ShipShape TV, John Greviskis.
Well, thanks, Buck. This is a 1988 17-foot Stingray. It's a bow rider that's primarily used for water skiing, cruising our intercoastal waterway, or doing some diving that's pretty close to shore. And what the boat is powered by is a 1988 3.0 liter, 130 horsepower MerCruiser engine. Now, the exhaust manifold and riser has rotted out on this boat before. This is the second time we are going to have to replace these parts, and that's due to the surroundings. This boat is primarily used in salt water. And when you're boating in salt water, this is a problem that happens pretty regularly, and that's why I've been using that good quality penetrating oil on the bolt heads. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to get this penetrating oil to seep down in there before I get a socket and ratchet on them. And while we're waiting for that to happen, what I'd like to do is I'd like to find out how the cooling system on this I/O setup actually works. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've invited a true authority to join us today. He's with the company that actually built this power plant. His name's Steve Schoeterer, and he's with MerCruiser. Let's go meet him. Hey, Steve.
Hi, John. Thanks for inviting us.
Thank you for coming by.
Sure.
I was hoping that you could first tell us how the cooling system on this power plant actually works.
Sure. The Alpha-1 cooling system starts with water entering the engine via the water pickups in the side of the strut and the gear housing. Water then goes up into a floppy vane impeller pump, which pressurizes it, then goes up into what's called the drive shaft housing. It transfers the water from there into the gimbal housing and then into the engine.
Okay, well, can you show me
Sure.
where that is? Where does it come in?
The water comes in this line. It's a 5/8 line, and it enters into the thermostat housing. From that point, it circulates to the cylinder block, cylinder heads, and then into the intake and exhaust manifold. Once the thermostat warms up and reaches temperature, then most of the excess of water is dumped into this manifold, through the manifold body, and out the elbow, where it mixes with the exhaust and goes back down in the outdrive.
How do these things corrode? How does this cast iron disintegrate?
It's primarily due to lack of maintenance. Saltwater is an extremely harsh environment, and if not kept in check, creates a lot of corrosion in these cast iron components. It creates rust, and then it corrodes, and then they fail. Salt water, if not kept intact, will do this. If you flush it after each use, it reduces that risk to an absolute minimum.
Real quick, show me how to flush the engine.
Sure. The engine is flushed by a set of earmuffs, earmuff flushing attachment, which is relatively inexpensive. And this goes through the strut and the outdrive through the pickups. It fastens and traps the earmuffs to the side of the gear case, where you can use water from a garden hose. It attaches to the earmuffs, and you use city water pressure and idle the engine with city water pressure into the earmuffs, and it flushes the entire system.
What about our freshwater boaters out there? They lose exhaust manifolds and risers as well. Why?
The reason primarily is due to the fact that in freshwater, if they do not drain the block and the manifold, when it gets very extremely cold, the water will freeze and crack in the block, cause block damage, head damage, and manifold damage.
Well, you know what I'm up against. I got a pretty big project in store for me today. Can you show me some tips? Can you give me a few tips on how to do this project?
I noticed you were using penetrating oil on some of the fasteners. That's good, but it may not get down deep enough to really get the fastener apart. Here's a trick that I'll show you that's kind of important, and it's pretty simple. A lot of people, when they take these apart, will use a 12-point socket. The problem with that is the fastener itself, the nut that you're trying to take off, has probably been reduced in size by corrosion. If you use a 12-point, it'll slip on the end of the nut, it'll round it off, and it'll become extremely difficult to get apart. The trick there is use a 6-point socket. It grabs the fastener better, and it's easier to get off.
So what should I do to the manifold before I get the socket and ratchet on it?
You should do is drain the manifold body and ensure that all the water is out of the manifold before you take the manifold apart.
I apologize for jumping in and out of the boat, but can you show me where that drain is?
Before we take it apart, the drain on the manifold, the water drain for the manifold is right here at the deepest part of the manifold and the bottom.
Okay, let me see where that is.
There's a 7/16 fastener.
Right there, okay,
Right.
good.
And drain the manifold body. It gets all the water out of the manifold so you don't get any water in the intake or the exhaust ports.
What should I do before I even start anything?
Before you start anything, you should disconnect the battery to ensure the battery's disconnected so you don't short anything out on the engine. You've got 12-volt live wires at the alternator, the starter, and at the circuit breaker. Be very careful to just ensure that you disconnect that first.
Well, if you notice, on this alternator, I covered it with some rags, and that's when I was spraying it with the penetrating oil. I didn't want any of that penetrating oil getting onto that alternator.
Excellent idea. The alternator obviously is extremely expensive, and you want to protect that for anything that could get on it as you're disassembling the engine. Covering that up will protect it.
If I can get this thing off, hopefully today, once I get it away from the engine, what should I do?
Once you get the manifold body off, ensure that you take rags and put them in the intake and exhaust ports of the cylinder head to protect any foreign material from going in there. You're going to be scraping a gasket along that surface. You don't want to get into those gasket shavings or any parts in there that could cause damage with the valves.
Steve, good advice. I'm going to get busy.
Best of luck with the project.
Thanks for coming by.
Sure.
Well, that was an excellent tip that Steve gave me about using that 6-point socket. And I'm going to need a 9/16 for the manifold, and I'm also going to need a 7/16 for that drain on the manifold. See, I'm also going to take this extension. Now, I've already gone ahead and disconnected the battery, and that's that water that Steve was talking about that we need to drain out of there. And now what I can do is I'm going to remove this carburetor. And it looks like I'm going to need probably a half-inch open-end wrench. Let me grab one of those. Well, now that I've got this carburetor out of the way, what I need to do next is I need to remove these hose clamps that are holding this boot onto this riser, and they're just held on with regular slotted screws. Hopefully this is going to break free. Now these two bolts right here on the riser, these are the ones that I'm kind of worried about. We've got some corrosion, especially on this back one here. We've got a lot of rust, and that's where I'm hoping this penetrating oil is really going to do its job. So we've got that 6-point socket on. Oh my gosh, I can't believe that. It's coming right out. Nice. Good deal. See if we can get that off. Oh, come on. Man. Ah, got it. All right. Oh, wow, thank goodness. Now this is where a lot of boaters get into trouble, is when the bolt head snaps off or it completely disintegrates on you. Now if that were to happen, what you would use, there are a couple of different choices for tools. I've got some set up for you here. This is an easy out right here, and basically what you would do is you would first have to drill out the stud and then put your easy out and back the stud out. Or there's also something called a drill out, which is this right here. And basically how this works is you put this right into a drill bit, and you would drill it in reverse, and that cuts the hole into the stud, and then you flip the drill into forward, and this piece right here will spin down into the stud and allow you to back the thing out. These work really, really great, but we are fine here, thank goodness. Now let's go ahead and get this riser off. Oh, good deal. Make this thing out of this boot. Oh, I got it. Let's take a look at the condition of this thing. Yeah, you can see what that salt water is doing is it's corroding the riser here. Now the exhaust manifold's probably going to be in much worse shape because that's where our leak was coming from, at the back of the engine. Let me get my socket, and we're going to try to bust that free. Oh man, it just doesn't get any better than this. These bolts aren't in too bad a shape. It's these back two that I'm really worried about. Man. Yeah, they're getting worse. Let's see what this one looks like. Oh, not bad. Good. Get off of here. Now, before I pop the seal that's holding the exhaust manifold onto the engine, what I'm going to do is I'm going to take a couple of the bolts, and I'm just going to put them in about 3 threads each. This way, when it does fall, it's not going to crush my alternator or anything like that, and I'll be able to manage it, and then I can just back out these bolts here a little bit. We'll get this thing free. I'm going to get it off is with a rubber mallet and a chisel. We don't care about what the appearance of this thing is anymore. We're going to try to bust it free. I just got a beat up chisel here. Try to use it. Get it off. Okay, we're getting the seam. Good. You want to stay away from the surface, though. You don't want to be prying on that surface. You could mar it, and then you get into trouble. We're fine here. I got it busted free. Let me back these bolts off, and I'll get it out of here, and I'll clean up the face with a gasket scraper. Let me set this out of the way. And now what we're going to do is we're going to remove this gasket that's right on the face of the engine, and we're going to stuff those rags in the motor. Like Steve was saying, this is to keep any debris from getting into these ports.
As John ties up a few loose ends, let's see what the G-Man himself looks for when buying a quality used boat.
You know, the wiring that's on a boat is one of the most important systems you could ever look at when you're considering purchasing a vessel. And what I mean here is if you're going to be boating in salt water, you need to take a look at what type of wire the previous boat owner has been using around the boat. I have an example right here. This is called copper tin wire. This is a marine grade copper tin wire, which means that there's tin and copper in the strands, which cuts down on corrosion. And the strands are very, very thin. And this allows for flexibility so that the strands don't break when you bend, especially when you get out into a rough sea. Wires have a tendency to bounce and to chafe. Now, I have a little larger or longer version of this wire right here, and you can clearly see that it says marine grade, and that's important because that's telling me that it's impervious to water, oil, and fuel penetration. Now, if you're going to be boating in freshwater, a copper wire just like this is fine, but again, the strands are much thicker and they're more brittle. They have a tendency to break. You also want to take a look at the terminal block, the terminal connectors, and the bus bar. If there's a lot of corrosion going on, what's going to happen is you're going to get into some electrical failures. What I do is I test everything up at the helm first, making sure that everything works. A lot of times in electrical problems, you'll see a domino effect. One thing will go out, then another thing will go out, another thing will go out. A real sign of some trouble is when a boat owner has spaghetti wired the thing together. A lot of shortcuts have been taking place here. You have to ask yourself a question: where else has he shortcutted on the boat? Now, you have to consider all this because electrical problems can be very, very expensive to fix, especially when you're talking about hiring a professional electrician to come out and sort this all out.
Hey, John, great tip. That'll help a lot of people. But unfortunately, the project is not complete. So let's get back into it.
Well, now we're all set to put the new parts in place, but before we do that, we need to find out what's available. So what I've done is I've gone ahead and I've invited an old friend of mine to join us here at the boatyard. His name is Larry LaVere, and he's with Sierra International. And Larry, I would shake your hands,
John.
But I've been busy. How are you? How you been?
I'm fine. How are you doing?
I'm doing good.
Hey, I'd like to thank you for inviting Sierra down today.
My pleasure. My pleasure. Now, what do we have set up here?
We've got a lot of product out on the table, and starting from this end, we've got the original equipment manifold that you just took off the boat. This is an OE replacement. This is from MerCruiser, the manifold riser combination, and you have the option of either installing this on your boat today or one of these other fine products from other aftermarket companies.
Who are the main players in aftermarket manifolds and risers?
There's four main players. One is Bar. Another company is called Osco. They make manifold and risers. There's Aqua Power, they're a division of Morris Controls. And of course Sierra. We offer a complete line of manifolds and risers.
What are these wooden looking manifolds?
Well, this is going to show you exactly what's inside the manifold. And what I'd like to start with is this cutaway. A lot of times you don't see what's inside the actual product. What we've done is cut away the manifold in half here to show you the intake passage. This is where the gas-air mixture would go into the combustion chamber. It would then leave or exit through an exhaust port through the center of the manifold here. This generates a tremendous amount of heat. The water jackets surrounding this manifold is what the cooling water comes into the engine and carries that heat away.
Okay.
Now, you're having a leaking problem with your manifold.
Yeah, I was going to say, is this where my corrosion is taking place right here?
Most probably the salt water really attacks this area. What you're seeing is there's two different problems. I believe you're seeing some leakage where the salt water has corroded this outside jacket here and the water is leaking outside of the engine. What is very bad and very detrimental to the engine is if you have leaking inside. If this would corrode through, then you get water into your engine and can cause major problems down the road.
Okay, now let's go back to this wood stuff. You were saying this shows us how they're designed or whatever.
This is the actual patterns that start the process of designing the tool. This actually demonstrates or shows the water jacket. That water jacket in this particular manifold is this thick. This is for a 350 Chevrolet, and before you can make hard tooling, these wooden mahogany models need to be made for dimensional purposes and to do your final work and final adjustments on any kind of cavity movement.
Okay.
These are done eventually in sand, a very hard sand, which then is put into a series of models and put together. And then the molten metal is poured in and occupies these empty cavities. And then it would actually occupy a shell on the outside. It's then taken out of its mold, put on a vibratory, and vibrated and shooken very violently. That takes all the sand and breaks it out of these cavities. And what you have is a manifold.
That would be
a
very cool factory tour down the road.
We would love to have you down and see exactly how it's done.
You think you can arrange that?
We'll, anytime.
Excellent. Okay. Why would I want to go aftermarket manifold versus just buying our original equipment?
Well, it is the boat owner's choice. Normally, an aftermarket manifold is a little less expensive. Aftermarket companies will tend to offer a extended warranty Plus, we have, and a lot of other aftermarket companies have a very well-staffed technical department. If you run into a problem on a boat, you can call up our tech department. One of our tech reps can actually walk you through the entire process. Everything from taking the manifold off to installing it, adjusting it up.
Talk to me about price. Now, we're going to be using your manifold here today, but talk to me about price. What do these things run?
I'll make it quick since you're holding it.
Oh, this thing is heavy.
The manifold that you're working with today will run approximately about $240, upwards of $600, depending on the configuration of the boat. The risers will run anywhere from $60 to $105 or $110.
Okay, well, Larry, thank you for stopping by. I got to get busy. I'm going to jump back in the boat.
Good luck.
I'll see you soon. Thanks. Well, if you'll remember, I used some denatured alcohol on the surface of the engine, and the reason I did that was to make sure that that surface was absolutely clean. Hopefully that won't fall. Be very ginger here. I don't want this thing crashing. And now what we need to do is we need to inspect the ports that are in the engine. Remember, I stuffed all these rags in here. Well, we need to see if there's any carbon buildup going on inside these ports. Now, what happens is if there's excessive carbon buildup, we've got a little bit right here. Let me show you. But if there's excessive carbon buildup inside there, it's telling us that the engine is burning oil, and that's another project that we're going to need to get into. But in this case, we're just fine. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to see which way my new gasket fits. That's it right there. And I'm also going to need to inspect the surface of the new exhaust manifold. I need to make sure that there's nothing on it, no sand or any dirt. And we seem to be fine. Now I'll set the gasket on, I'll put a couple of bolts in it, and we'll start putting it onto the engine. Get this started. Now what we need to do is we need to inspect the surface where our riser or elbow is going to mate onto the exhaust manifold. That looks just fine. We'll also inspect the new riser, make sure that there's no flaws in there. It's really vital that we don't have any leaks on this part, because if there is a leak there, what'll happen is water could flow back down into the cylinders and again really damage your engine. So that's very key. We'll also only have to put the carburetor back into place and then hook it back into the boot. And this is a real key time to maybe look at having your carburetor repaired or rebuilt. What I mean here is if your boat's hesitating, if you're having a problem with cold starting or anything like that, invest in a carb kit. That's what this thing is right here. They run about 20 bucks, and that'll give you a new needle and seat along with all new gaskets. And you know, if you take this to the service shop, it's only a 1-hour job. And that means, you know, you just factor in what their service rate is, 45 bucks, 60 bucks an hour, whatever that is, plus the $20 for the kit, and you've got a really nice rebuilt carb. Now, how I'm going to tighten the exhaust manifold onto the engine is the manufacturer recommends that we go with 25 foot-pounds, and that's why I've got this torque wrench set to right here. We've got it right at 25. Let me switch out my sockets, and we'll crank this thing tight, and that's all there is to it. Now what you want to do is you want to inspect this rubber boot and make sure that it's still malleable and that it's not cracked or anything. If it is still in good condition, you can reuse it. You don't have to go through the expense of buying that additional part. What I had to do is I had to take the original studs out of the old manifold and put them into the new one right here, and now I'm ready to put the carb on. And after I get this in place, we're going to be back on the water. Well, I've just about got everything buttoned up. We have our new exhaust manifold in place. We have a rebuilt carburetor that's onto that exhaust manifold, and you'll notice that I didn't show you how to do that. That's because I want you to tune into another show. We'll get into that in the future. We also have our new riser, and this boat is now seaworthy and ready to get back out on the water. Well, hey, you know the drill. This is the point of the show where we try to answer some of your questions, either through letters that you've written in or from emails. But before we get into today's question, we need to give you our addresses. Buck, why don't you do that?
Our mailing address is ShipShape TV, P.O. Box 31561, Palm Beach Gardens, Florida 33420. Or if you have internet access, the address is shipshapetv.com.
Okay, here's today's question. It comes from John, who lives in Naples, Florida, and he writes, "Dear ShipShape TV, my wife and I would like to know if when it's time to reapply anti-foulant paint to the bottom of the boat, do we need to just pressure wash it and then go, or do we need to pressure wash the bottom, sand, and repaint?" Well, John, my first inclination would be to maybe scuff up the bottom of the boat, apply some sort of a solvent like a denatured alcohol, and then reapply the bottom paint. But then I started thinking, maybe I should call some experts. And so what I did is I got on the phone and I first called Pettit Paint, which is a very large provider of anti-foulant paint. And they recommended the same thing. They recommended that after you pressure wash, go ahead and scuff the bottom up, wipe it down with some sort of denatured alcohol, and then paint with the anti-foulant. Then I called the other big guy in the marine industry, Interlux, and I asked them. And they said that as long as you're using the same type of bottom paint, that is perfectly fine to pressure wash the bottom and then just go ahead and repaint. So John, I'm kind of throwing it back on you. I'm going to say dealer's choice, all right? Hey, thanks for writing in. Well, hey, we're just about out of time. I hope you're going to write in your questions, but you can do yourself one last favor. Get out there until next time and keep your boat shipshape.